Yes. Now in today's lecture we'll have a number of other characters. Now by this time there must be little familiarity with the language also, because the language appears very strange at the beginning, but that strangeness, it wipes out with the passage of time, because when we try to understand what the words mean, there are little changes in the spellings. So when you try to understand, when you read page or two or maybe 5 or 6 pages, by that time you manage to be able to understand what is said. There are not many words, so by this time we read 5-6 pages of the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. We do not need to look each and every word in the glossary. So this is something good, that we, with the passage of time, we understand the language and we get to know how to read the text, and we can enjoy reading the literature. We can enjoy reading the poetry. Then today we will have a number of characters, including the monk and the friar. And we will see that what was the condition, because these people, they reflect the condition of the church at that time. The first character we had, that we just discussed, that the prioress was one of the lady belonging to the church, but on the other hand, whatever she did, each and every line of her description reflects that whatever she was doing, the way she behaved, even her name, that was very fashionable, that belonged to the materialistic, worldly things. So it was not really like a nun. Nuns are supposed to be simple. They are also called sisters. You must have heard in the society they are called sisters, and the priests are called father. But they are not, and they are supposed to be helpful to the needy. They are supposed to be caring for them, kind and loving and affectionate. On the other hand, she is on the contrary, she is not kind to human beings. Rather, she is kind to the wild animals. She is kind to her pets only, and she has lots of manners. She has the manners like that of the princess. Okay, the next character that belongs to the church is a monk. A monk, there was a fair with the mastery. Mastery is the superiority. An outrider, outrider is the officer of the monastery that loved venery. Venery refers to hunting. Now there was a monk who excelled in the as an officer of monastery, and he loved riding. He loved hunting. A manly man to be an abbot able. Abbot is a person who has the charge of a large monastery, who controls the large monastery. एक बहुत बड़े स्केल पे जो चर्च है, उसके साथ जब एक स्मॉल इंस्टीट्यूशन भी होता है, नॉट स्मॉल बट देयर इज एन इंस्टीट्यूशन विद द चर्च, जहाँ पर के लर्निंग और टीचिंग का काम भी होता है. बेसिकली क्रिश्चियनिटी में school and church, they are not different things. So with the services, with the religious services, there is a part of the church जहाँ पर तालीम और तरबियत दी जाती है, जहाँ पर सिखाया जाता है, जुबानें सिखाई जाती हैं और मुख्तलिफ अलूम सिखाए जाते हैं. So that is known as a monastery, and there even the people are trained to send to different parts of the country to establish new churches. So it is a kind of network for spreading Christianity. So abbot is a person who is in charge of the monastery, of a large monastery. So this line, a manly man, that he is a capable man of becoming an abbot. Now why becoming an abbot? This is an ironical, this is a humorous line here, because he loved hunting. This was something contrary to the teachings and preachings of Christianity. He himself belonged to the church, and in Christianity the people belonging to church are not allowed to hunt. Full many a dainty horse had he in stable. Dainty, a good choice. So he had a good choice of horses present in his stable, and when he rode, men might his bridle hear. So the people might hear the bridle of his horse when he rode on his horses. Now those horses, once again, probably these lines, they show that He is a wealthy man having lots of good horses in his stable, and he is fond of hunting. Jinlin in a whistling wind as clear, and eke as loud as doth the chapel bell. Now, when he rode on his horses, the men living in the surroundings in the community could hear the jingling of and the whistle of the wind as clear as they could hear the chapel bell. Chapel is a small church, as they could hear the church bell which is there in the surroundings. So, these lines, they show that the monk is fond of riding. He is fond of going out and visiting different places, which is once again contrary to the teachings of Christianity. The first law that he violated was hunting, because he loved hunting and he wants to do it at any cost. And secondly, he has got lots of horses in his stable and he loves riding, and even the people living in the surroundings, they could hear the bridle of his horse, just as they listen to the jingling of the wind or they could hear that chapel bell, the church bell. There, as this lord was keeper of the cell, so he is the keeper of the cell. Cell is the small church or the place where he is the master. The rule of Saint Maur or of Saint Benite, Saint Maur is Saint Maurus and Saint Benite is the Saint Benedict. So the rules, the doctrine, the rules given by these Saint Maurus and Saint Benedict, they were given way back, centuries ago. So by cause that it was old and sandal straight is narrow. So the poet says that probably he thought that since Saint Maurus and Saint Benedict, they lived in the older times, and he let that past go and he let it pass, and he believed that that is something narrow-minded, and this is the new time, the modern era, so he should not believe in older things. So he did not practice those older laws, older rules. This elk monk let old things pass and healed after the new world the space. So he wanted to held the place after the new world, new laws, because as it is said that with the passage of time things change and things become obsolete also, they become outdated. So he thinks since those are the laws, humility and poverty, these are, and teaching and preaching, these are the rules, these are the laws given by Saint Maurus and Saint Benedict. But since these are older, so ironically, the host says that since he thinks that those laws are old, क्योंकि वो पुराने हो चुके हुए हैं और पुरानी चीज़ों को तो गुजर जाना चाहिए, तो इसलिए वो जिंदगी को नई दुनिया में नए तरीकों के मुताबिक गुजारना चाहता है. He yeft not of that text a pulled hen that saith that hunters bet not holy men. He does not give any importance. He does not even give the importance equivalent to an oyster to that saying that says that a monk should not hunt, that saith that hunters bet not holy men, because in that text it says that hunters are not holy men. They are, nay, that a monk, when he is restless, is likened. So he did not care for the text that said that a monk out of his cloister is the place where a monk lives, and he studies, he spends his time praying from God, teaching, preaching, so he lives in solitude. So that place is known as cloister, the hut of the monk where he lives in order to have a life of preaching, teaching, and he reads a lot. Basically his aim, the aim of his life, the aim of a clergyman is to practice the laws of God and to live in solitude. Because that book, it says that a monk out of cloister is like a fish out of water. The way a fish cannot live when it is out of water, same should be the case with the monk when he is out of his cloister, since he is, because it is considered to be a natural place. A cloister is considered to be a natural place for a monk. तो ये कहा जाता है कि जिस तरह से एक मछली पानी के बगैर जिंदा नहीं रह सकती, इसी तरह से एक मॉन्क अपने हट, अपनी उस स्पेसिफिक जगह पर जहां पर वो अपना वो वक्त गुजारता है, उसके बगैर नहीं रह सकता. So basically once again he is denying the orders of the scriptures. वो जो होली टेक्स्ट है, वो जो लॉज हैं, जो established tradition है, he is denying that, not denying that verbally, but practically he is not acting upon those things. He is not practicing it. But Thilke text healed he net worth an oyster. So he is not giving that text the value even equivalent to an oyster. And I said his opinion was good. So humorously he is saying that the host is saying that his opinion is good. Now why he is saying that? Why should he study and make himself wood? That why should he work hard and study and make himself weak? Upon a book in cloister, always to pore. Pore is to read. So Swinken with his hands and labor as Austin bit, how shall the world be served? Austin is basically a reference to Saint Augustine, who Christianized Britain in 597. So he said that why should, humorously he is saying that when everybody has got that material pursuit, जब हर कोई material चीज़ों के पीछे भाग रहा है, हर कोई जो है वो बाहर जाना चाहता है, एक अच्छी लाइफ गुजारना चाहता है जिसमें कोई टेंशन्स ना हो, जिसमें कोई हार्ड वर्क ना हो, लेबर ना हो, free from tensions and anxiety. So he said his opinion is good. He is also doing the same as others are doing. But this is something humorously said. On the other hand, if we look at the status that he held in the society, he is a monk. He is not supposed to do all these things. उसके status के लिहाज से ये चीजें उसके लिए suitable नहीं हैं. So he says that Swinken is the hard work, that instead of staying in his cloister and reading the books and making himself weak and thin, why should not he go out? Why should not he work hard with his hands and labor, as Austin has said, or in that case, how would the world be served? So the way he is going out and doing things around in the society, he is serving the world. So this is something ironical here. Let Austin have his swing to him reserved. So again the reference to Saint Augustine, since he Christianized Britain, and it took him probably 7 years and he lived all his rest of his life there from 597, because he landed in Britain in 597, and from 597 onwards he spent all his life for preaching Christianity to the English people. So he says that all that hard work, it should be reserved for Augustine. Let him do that. वो उसके लिए है, वो उसका काम है, वो ही करे. Therefore he was precursor aright. Precursor means practice pricking. So he was practice pricking it. So greyhounds he had as swift as fowl in flight. So he was having greyhounds, and they were as soft as the birds during the flight are. उसने उनको इतने अच्छे तरीके से रखा हुआ है, इतने अच्छे तरीके से उनको लुक आफ्टर किया जा रहा है कि वो हाउंड्स जो हैं वो किसकी तरह लगते हैं, जैसे कि परिंदे हवा में फ्लाई कर रहे हों. Of pricking and of hunting for the hare was all his lust. Lust is the desire, and for no cost would he spare. So his only desire was what? He desired extremely only pricking, and pricking was from riding. He wanted to ride on his horses and he wanted to hunt for the hare. This was all his lust, and he would not let it go at any expense. He would not leave it at any cost. I say his sleeves perfiled. Now that was something that how he behaved, what was his attitude towards his services, towards his actions, what he was supposed to do and what he was entrusted in doing, कि उसकी क्या ड्यूटीज हैं और वो करना क्या चाह रहा है, क्या करना उसको पसंद है. नाउ वी कम टू द डिस्क्रिप्शन ऑफ हिज ड्रेस and his physical features also. I say his sleeves were filled at the horn with grace, and that the finest of a land. And for to fasten his hood under his chin, he had of gold wrought a full curious pin. Now his sleeves, they were decorated at the edges with the grey squirrel, with the fur of the grey squirrel, and which is the finest thing found on that land. And to fasten his hood under his chin, he had gold pins. A love knot in the greater end there was. His head was bald, that shone as any glass. And at the other end there was a love knot. It was there was a twisted loop, and his head was, his head was bald. He did not have any hair, कोई बाल नहीं थे, और वो ऐसे चमक रहा था जैसे कि कोई शीशा हो. And eke his face, and also his face, not only the head, सिर्फ सर नहीं चमक रहा था, also his face, as he had been anointed. So it was his face, it was his head that was bald. He did not have any hair. It was shining as if it was a glass, and his face was also shining as if he had been anointed. He was a lord full fat. He was a fat man. He was a healthy man, and in good point. His condition was good. He was healthy. He was chubby. His iron steep and rolling in his head, and his eyes were sharp, and they were rolling in his head. So definitely when a person does not have hair, how does he look? It seems that when he looks and when he is clever enough, his eyes, they roll in his head. That seemed as a furnace of a lead. So furnace is the furnace. So these eyes that rolled in his head, they appeared like the furnace. His boots supple, his horse in great estate. So his boots were supple, they were good. His horse was in a good condition. Now certainly he was a fair prelate. Now certainly he was a fair prelate. There is emphasis on this line that after saying all this description, he is saying that now certainly, that since he has described all these things, he has got those particular requirements. He was a fair prelate, that he is a good clergyman. Now this is an ironical line. That is why it's been highlighted also, that he does not deserve all whatever he is doing. His actions, his interests, his attitude, because of all that, he did not deserve the post that he was at. So by describing all that, he does his interest. The host ironically says that he was a fair clergyman. He was not pale as a fourpenny ghost. Now fourpenny ghost is a ghost that has been pined away. So he was not pale, he was not weak. Usually the monks, the clergymen who are supposed to live in the cloister, who are supposed to study and to read and preach, and they are usually weak because they don't have their interest in eating and merrymaking. But he was not pale, he was not like a ghost. So his condition was very good. He was a fat man who did not look like a clergyman. Clergymen are usually thin, they are weak, because their interest is not eating and drinking and merrymaking. Their interest is reading, studying. They are always, they are studying, pondering over things, pondering over the creation. A fat swan loved he best of any roost. Now, what is the condition that why isn't he pale? He loved what? He loved a fat swan. Swan is a bird. His palfrey was as brown as is a berry. So his palfrey is a small riding horse. So his horse was also as brown as a berry, and he loved what? A roasted swan. A roasted swan was something that he liked to eat the most. So this is the reason. The narrator, the host, has told the reason also. He first said that he was not pale. He was not pale like a clergyman. He was not like a ghost. Now he is telling the reason. That what is the reason? He loved what? He is telling his eating habits, that he loved eating the roasted swan, a fat swan, which is healthy, having lots of flesh on it. Now, if we sum up the monk's character, first of all, we had the description, we had a bit of information that what he does and his interests, what he wanted to do, what he was happy with, what he does in the society, and then a bit of irony and humor is also added to it, because there is a sharp contrast in what he is supposed to do and what he is doing and what are his interests. Basically, the clergymen are supposed to mold their interests according to their situation, according to they are not like ordinary men, they are role models for others. Religion से जो लोग ताल्लुक रखते हैं, जिनका particularly in Christianity, they don't have a life of their own. They are supposed to live in isolation, in solitude, and to ponder on things, and to help people, and to be sympathetic to them, and to be helpful to them. On the contrary, these characters that we have found so far, we have read about the prioress and the monk. Both these characters, they are not what they are supposed to do. Their interests are exactly contrary. They are not doing what they are supposed to do. So they are like ordinary men. They are like any ordinary person in the society. A friar there was. So next we come up to a friar, a wanton and a merry, a lamentor, a full solemn man. Solemn is a serious man. So there was a friar with them. He was very gay, a merry man. Merry is somebody who is very happy. A lamentor. Lamentor basically refers to the area. Lamentor is a person who grants, who confessions. Basically, an area is specified that this is the area, and people would come to give their charity to the person, and they would give the sums of money, and they would confess their sins, and he would give them pardon. So he was a serious man. In all the orders four is known that can of much of dalliance and fair language. So he possessed fine speech, he possessed fine language for his speech. He had made full many a marriage of young women at his own cost. He had made a number of marriages at his own expense. Unto his order he was a noble post. Noble post, he was at a great stature in the church. He held a great post. Full well beloved and familiar was he. Now these are the modern English equivalents. Now this word beloved, it's B-E-L-O-V-E-D, and here it's B-I. So there are not much differences. If we concentrate, if we carefully try to read the text, after some time we tend to understand the most of it. Now the F-A-M-U-L-I-E-R is familiar. So, full well beloved and familiar was he with franklins over all in his country. So whatever the area was, he was familiar with all the surrounding friars. with all the surrounding franklins, and eke with worthy women of the town. And he knew, and he not only the franklins, he also knew all the worthy women, all the women of the town. Now here why there is the mention of the word worthy, we will come to know from the description later on that what does it mean, because these words, they are very meaningful. They carry certain meanings, because these statements, some of them, they are quite satirical, they have irony in them. तंजिया अंदाज में, एक तंजो मजाक के अंदाज में द नैरेटर होस्ट जो है वो उनको क्रिटिसाइज करता है, उनको तनकीद का निशाना बनाता है. फॉर ही हैड पावर ऑफ कन्फेशन एज सेड हिमसेल्फ मोर देन अ क्यूरेट, फॉर ऑफ हिज ऑर्डर ही वॉज licentiate. So he himself said that he had the power of confession more than a curate. Curate is also a person who gives confessions, more than a curate. And why? Because he was the person who was licensed. He had the license to give confessions. So he had the legal liberty, legal freedom to give confessions to people, to listen to their sins. Their people go and they confess their sins, and he gives them confessions. But he does not give confession to everyone. This we will see in the text to come. Full sweetly heard he confession. He very nicely heard the confessions, and pleasant was his absolution. Absolution is the forgiving sense, and his sense of forgiving was very pleasant, and he heard those confessions very pleasantly, very sweetly, very attentively. He paid full attention to those confessions, to whatever the people confessed. He gave full attention. He was an easy man to give penance. Penance is the penance. He was an easy man to give penance, there as he wished to have a good pittance. Pittance is the extra allowance. Now, he easily gave penance, gave maafinama to the person. उनको माफी मिल जाती थी बहुत अच्छे तरीके से if they gave him extra money. Now, good pittance is the extra allowance, extra money. So, other than something that is to be spent on the church, अगर वो उसको उससे ज़्यादा मनी दे रहे हैं उसके खर्च के लिए, then he was a very good man, he was an easy man to give them confessions. So once again, this is ironical here that he was doing what? This is the state of the church, that he was a corrupt man. So far we have had the prioress, then we had the monk, and now it's the friar, and three of the people, they are corrupt in their own way. They have their own ways of living, and their belonging, their connection to the church, their status in the church, that did not affect them even a little. For unto a poor order for to give is sign that a man is well shriv, for if he yef, he dost make avaunt. He wisted that a man was repentant, for many a man so hard is of his heart, he may not weep although him sore smarte. Now, when the poor people, they came and they confessed their sins, he does make, it is the sign that the man is not well, and if he gave, that the man was repentant, the man was sorry for whatever he had done, because he gave them confession only if they paid him sufficient money, because there were men who were hard of heart and they would not weep, and even they could not weep, and it would trouble them. It was very hard. They had such stiff hearts that even for over their sins, thinking of the life after that, they would not cry on their sins. So what they would do, they would come there and those rich people, they would come and they would give him money instead of confessions, and he would happily grant confessions to them. So therefore, instead of weeping in prayers, weeping, it's the modern English equivalent, W-E-E-P-I-N-G, weeping, and this prayers is the modern English prayer. So there is a little difference in the spellings, but the words are understandable. So instead of praying and weeping, what they will do, men mute yev silver to the poor friars. So what men should do, he believes that men should bring, instead of weeping over their sins, instead of being guilty of their sins and praying for their sins, men should give silver to the poor friars. Now look at him. He is calling, the narrator is describing him as the poor friar, that people, in order to confess their sins, they should have sufficient money to give it to the poor friars. His tippet was a fast full of knives and pins, and to yeven fair wives. Now tippet is stuffed, the pouch. His pouch is always stuffed with the knives and with the pins, with the beautiful pins, and that are to be given to the fair wives, that are to be given to the women. Look at the condition. This is the person, he belongs to the church, and first of all, the first instance of his attitude towards religion, we had that he, instead of being honest and just to his profession, what he is doing, he is taking money from people, he is taking extra allowances from them. Moreover, now his pouch is full of the pins that could be given as gift to the women, to the fair women. Fair are the women who belong to the, who are not poor, who are good looking, and certainly he had a murray note. Well could he sing and plain on a rote, of weddings he bar outerlay the press. So he could play the instrument, he could sing a song, and he could sing a different type of music that is a very melodious music that is usually sung on the weddings. So those wedding songs he sang, and he even gained prizes for that. His neck white as a fleur de lis, thereto he strong was as a champion. He knew the taverns well in every town, and every inch hostler and tapestier better than a leather or a beggar. His neck was white. It was as white as the floor, and he was a very strong man. He was a strong like a champion, and he knew all the taverns. Tavern is a bar where you can have the drinks, जहाँ पर आप ड्रिंक्स ले सकते हैं, चाय या कहवा खाना बेसिकली टैवर्न इज अ कहवा खाना जहाँ पर आप ड्रिंक्स वगैरह पी सकते हैं. So he knew in every town, he knew all the taverns, and he knew all the people who run those taverns, the ones who were the tapesters and the women who run that. Instead of knowing a leper or a beggar. So the work of a friar is to take money from the people when they confess their sins, the set amount of money, and to spend that money for the betterment of poor people, and to give it to the needy, to the beggars, to the lepers who cannot work, so that they can also spend that money on their needs. So instead of knowing the lepers and beggars of the society, this friar, he knew all the barmaids, he knew all the women who are running those taverns. For unto such a worthy man as he, accord not as by his faculty to have with sick leisures acquaintance, it is not honest, it may not abounds, for to deal with no such porale, but all with rich and sellers of white ale. Now he had the ability not only to take money from he had the ability, he had the acquaintance with every now and then, every person at every inch, he knew them all, he had the acquaintances with the rich people, and his manner was such that he could even convince the poorest of the people to give charity. So he deals in such a manner that even the poorest of the people, they would give alms, they would give money or anything that they could. And overall, thereas profit should arise, courteous he was and lowly of service. He was humble in his services. He was courteous and he was humble in his services. There ne'er no man nowhere so virtuous. He was such a virtuous, he was such a capable man. He was the best beggar in his house. That in his house means in the temple, in the church where he was working, where he was appointed. So in that house, in that temple, he was the best beggar. And yet a certain firm for the grant, that in the monastery he was the most efficient worker, and he was the best beggar. He would not he was such a virtuous man, such an efficient man, that he was humble in his services, he was courteous. So these are a kind of ironical remarks after his whole description, that he was not familiar. The work of a friar is to facilitate the poor people, is to take money from the rich and to give it to the poor people, so that they can also live their life, they can also have living. Instead of knowing those lepers and beggars and the needy people, this friar, he knew all the women. His pouch was full of those pens that could be gifted to those fair women. Then he had such a skill, such a craft in his speech, that he not only took money from the rich people, he even took money from the poor people who could not afford to give any money. So he was such a clever man. None of his brethren came there in his haunt. So none of his brothers came there in his. For though a widow had not a show, that even a widow who has not got shoes, so pleasant was his in principio. Now principio, that his principles, his rules, they were so good, they were so pleasant. His manner of speech, his manner of addressing the people, they were so good that even a widow who had not got shoes, yet would he have a farthing ere he went. So he would have something out of the widow, from the widow who does not even have shoes to wear. His purchase was well better than his rent, and reg he could as it were right a whelp. Reg is the sport and whelp is a puppy. So the money that he begged, it was more than what he received as his wages, as his salary. So that was more than that. So his purchase, whatever he gathered, whatever he collected from the confessions, it always outnumbered his original wages or his salary. And reg he could, as it was right a whelp, so he could go around and play, he could be as playful as a puppy is. In love days there could he much help, for there he was not like a cloisterer with a threadbare cope, as is a poor scholar, but he was like a master or a pope. Of double worsted was his semicope, that rounded as a bell out of the press. Now once again these lines, they reflect his character. In love days there could he much help, so he provided help to the youngsters, and since he made marriages of people also. So since he was not living in he was not a cloisterer, he was not somebody who was living a life of a solitude, he was not leading a lonely life. With a threadbare cope, cope is the gown, the outer cloak, as is a poor scholar. So his appearance was not like that of a poor scholar. वो एक गरीब स्कॉलर की तरह, एक पढ़ने वाले की तरह से नहीं लगता था. Because when somebody is interested in learning and studies only, so that person does not bother. उसको ज़्यादा शौक होता है कि वो अपने जो पैसे हैं वो पढ़ाई के ऊपर, कोई बुक्स खरीदने पे, उन चीज़ों पर सर्व करें. So he did not appear like that. But how did he appear? He was like a master or a pope. He appeared like a master. या उसकी शान और शौकत ऐसी थी जैसे कोई पोप हो. Pope is the head of the church. Of double worsted was his semicope. Double worsted is the he had the double gown. Semicope is the small cloak. So the gown that he was wearing, it was doubled. It had double fabric. That rounded as a bell. When he wore that cloak, it rounded as from the bottom, as if it was a bell out of the press. So he wore such a fashionable gown, such a fashionable cloak. Somewhat he lisped for his wantonness. So he stammered. Wantonness is the playfulness, his gayfulness. So to make his English sweet upon his tongue, in order to have a style in his speech, he lisped a little to have that gayfulness in his English. And in his harping, when that he had sung, harping basically is singing on the flute, to use that while singing. So when that he had sung, his eye twinkled in his head aright. So when he used to sing a song, and when he was playing that instrument, the harp, and he was singing a song also, his eyes twinkled. They were brightly, they glittered in his head. They glittered right in the middle of his head, as do the stars in the frosty night. And he is using the simile that these eyes, they appeared in his head like the stars appear on a frosty night. This worthy lemator was clept Hubbard. Clept is called. So this lemator, once again, the use of the word worthy is ironical here, because he is not suitable for to be called a lemator. This worthy lemator was clept Hubbard. He was called Hubbard. And some critics believe that Hubbard was an unusual name during the Chaucer's time. So till here we have finished with the character of the friar. A merchant was there with a forked beard. Fork is like that fork, that spoon, कांटा जिससे खाते हैं. So in Chaucer's time, उस वक्त में ये फैशन था कि लोग अपनी बियर्ड को एक फोक की तरह, एक कांटे की तरह से जो है वो शेप देते थे. इन motley is a colorful dress जिसमें बहुत सारे पैचेस लगे होते हैं. Probably in the areas of Sindh it's called ralli. I don't know if it is present in any other languages also. And high on horse he sat. The merchant had a forked beard. He was wearing a motley, he was wearing a very colorful dress, and he sat high on a horse. Upon his head a Flandrish beaver hat. Now Flandrish is a costly, beaver is the name of the animal, and the hat, which is made up of the skin or the fur of the beaver, it is a very costly hat. His boots clasped fair and fetisly. His boots, they were tied very fairly and neatly. His reasons he spake full solemnly. So whenever he talked very seriously. Sonance always the increase of his winning. So whenever he spoke, his words, they carried weight. He was all serious. So whenever he talked, his wit was reflected. So we come to know about the merchant, that what type of appearance he had. He had a forked beard. उसकी beard जो है बिल्कुल एक कांटे की तरह से जाहिर हो रही थी. उसने एक कलरफुल ड्रेस पहना हुआ था. वो एक हॉर्स के ऊपर बैठा हुआ था और वो एक कॉस्टली, सिंस इज अ मर्चेंट ही कैन अफोर्ड टू हैव कॉस्टली थिंग्स. वो एक बीवर हैट उसने पहना हुआ है, बहुत स्टाइलिश, बहुत महंगा बीवर हैट उसने पहना हुआ है. और उसके बूट बहुत अच्छे तरीके से टाई किए गए हैं. और जब भी उसने बात की है उसने बहुत सीरियसली अपने मतलब की, और ऐसी बात की है दैट वुड इंक्रीज हिज प्रॉफिट, दैट वुड बी फेवरेबल फॉर हिज ट्रेड पर्पस. वो अपने मकसद की बात करेगा. सिंस ही इज अ मर्चेंट, तो हमेशा उसको हर चीज में अपना मकसद उसके सामने होगा. He would the sea were kept for anything. Betwixt Middleburg and Orwell, well could he in exchange shields sell. This worthy man full well his bit beset. There was no weight that he was in debt. What he could see, he would see that there should not be any difference between the Middleburg and Orwell. This is basically a province in France, and the other is an island. So he says, the narrator says that he does not want to see that difference. He says that difference should be lessened, so that he can employ, he can sell the things so that he can sell the goods, and he can employ his wits in a right manner. And there was no chance, nobody could ever prove that he was in debt also, or he had taken any money from anyone. So stately was he of his governance, that the way he managed thing, it was very organized, it was well mannered. So his bargains and with his chevisons, forsooth he was a worthy man withal, but sooth to say I not how men him call. So the narrator says that he did not know his name, but he was a worthy man of all of them, and his bargains, वो जो भी कोई बहस करता था, जब भी कोई बात होती थी, he was the right man. He did not let anybody speak in front of him. He could convince people. He had, since being a merchant, he had that quality of merchantship that he could convince people. In his bargains he was always successful. And chevisance is the usury, that you give money with some interest, or you give money or you take money from somebody with some interest. So in those bargains he was always successful. He knew how to do it. Finally the narrator says that what his name was or how people called him, he did not know his name. He only knew that he was a merchant. A clerk there was of Oxford also. So there was a clerk of Oxford, that unto logic had long ago. So he had liked logic, and for a very long time he had gone for the logic. As lean was his horse as is a rake. So he had a very weak horse, and he gnashed not right fat I undertake. And the narrator, he agrees that he undertakes that even he himself was not very fat. He himself was thin. He was thin. He was very slim, and looked half is the hollow, and there too soberly. Soberly is sad. He was thin. He was slim. His horse was also very weak, very thin. He looked hollow, and therefore he looked very sad, very sober and serious. Full threadbare was his overeste courtepy. Overeste courtepy is the short gown that he is wearing. Threadbare, it is worn out. His gown, his outer gown, his outer short gown is threadbare. It is worn out. खत्म हो चुका है बिल्कुल. उसके बहुत बुरे हालात हैं, बिल्कुल खत्म होने के काबिल है. For he had उसका आउटर गाउन बिल्कुल खत्म हो चुका हुआ है और वो पहना हुआ है, शायद बहुत पुराना है. For he had gotten him yet no benefice, nay was so worldly for to have office. So he had not got any benefit out of it. He has not secured anything for himself, and he has not spared anything from his office, any worldly material, any worldly benefit he has not received for his own life from his office. For him was never have at his bed's head 20 books. So what he would love to have at his bedside, he would love to have at the towards the side of the head and on his bed, he would like to have 20 books clad in black and red. Clad is wrapped in black and red, of Aristotle and his philosophy, than robes, riche and fildel or gay Chaucer. Chaucer is a small harp, the musical instrument which is used for singing the songs. So the approach of this Oxford clerk is different. This is another character who is an ideal character, and he is leading the life the way he is supposed to, because he is a clerk at the Oxford, and he is least interested in the worldly things, and even from his job he has not spared any benefits, he has not received any benefits for himself, he has not gained any worldly materials, he has not collected anything for himself. And he loved what? To have 20 books of Aristotle and philosophy, and other than. So instead of having the worldly riches or the costly clothes and the wealth and the songs and musical instruments, instead of having all these things, he would love to have 20 books on philosophy and on Aristotle. But all be that, he was a philosopher. So he was a philosopher, yet had he but little gold in coffer. So he had little gold in his coffer, and all that he might of his friends hente on books and on learning he it spent. So whatever his friends and others around him, people who were rich, they gave him, he spent everything on buying the books and on learning. So this was the way he was spending the money that he was getting. He was not spending it for eating and merrymaking and visiting different places and all that. How he was spending his life? Whatever the money he received from people around him, from his friends, he was spending even that money on books, on buying books and on learning. And busily gan for the soul's prey. Busily is a sincerely. Of him that yef him wherewith to scole. So he would very sincerely pray for the people who had supported him in his studies, who had given him money, because those people, since he was an Oxford clerk, so people gave him money for his studies, and he sincerely prayed for those people. He very sincerely prayed for them. Of study took he most care and most heed. He took great care of his studies, and he paid lots of attention to it. Not a word spake he more than was need. He never spoke a word more than was needed, and that was said in form and reverence, and short and quick and full of high sentence. So whenever he never said anything that was not required, anything that was he spoke only when it was needed, and he said, whenever he said something, it had the proper form. He was not a very talkative person, so he was very careful in his speech also. He spoke taking proper care of the wording and the expressions that he was using, and the reverence also. He took proper care of the reverence, the respect of his own self and the others also. And short and quick and full of high sentence. Whatever he spoke, it was always short, it was quick, and it had the meaning. It had full of high sentence, it had meaning. Whatever he said, it was meaningful. Sown in moral virtue was his speech, and gladly would he learn and gladly teach. So, whatever he spoke, it had some moral value. It had the moral virtue in it, and he would gladly learn, very happily he would learn and he would teach. So once again, after night, we had another character who is a model, another ideal character. He is spending his life. He is ideal from the perspective of learning and teaching, because he is spending his life by happily learning and teaching. He is not putting it off till tomorrow, or he is not interested in some other thing, and he is not doing these things forcefully. He is happily doing all these things. Next we have a sergeant of law. So a lawyer is there, war and ways, that often had been at the Paris. There was also full reach of excellent, discreet he was, and of great reverence. He seemed swish, his words weren't so wise. So he was a distinguished lawyer, and he had all that excellence. He had great respect in the society. He was very careful about his decisions, and he was very prudent and wise also, but his words were not very wise. Justice he was full often in assess. So he often went for the justice by patent and by plain commission. So he took money for providing justice to the people. For his science and for his high renown. So he took that commission, he took that money for his science, for his knowledge, whatever the knowledge, because he would file those suits, those law cases on the basis of, and he would fight against them on the or he would argue in those lawsuits on the basis of his knowledge, and for that he would take money. And for his high renown, of feats and robs had he many own. Own is none. He had none. So he was very famous. He was renowned by lots of people. So great a purchaser was nowhere known. So he was a great purchaser. He was the one who was buying things. He was buying the lands. So there wasn't anybody, there was no such a great buyer in the surroundings as he was. All was fee simple to him in effect. His purchasing might not been in fact. So it was very simple for him that whatever the fee he received from the lawsuits, he spent that on buying lands, and he thought that this purchasing, it might not be invalid. It would not lose its value. Nowhere so busy a man as he there nas. B-I-S-Y, this is busy. So there wasn't any man as he was. Nowhere there was such a busy man as he was. And yet he seemed busier than he was. So he was busy, but he tried to look even more busy. He tried to look even busier than he was. In terms had he cash and dooms all, that from the time of King William were fall. So he knew all the terms, all the cases, all the lawsuits that had been filed from the time. This is King William. This is a reference to the Norman conquest, that from the time, because the Norman conquest, it happened in 1066. As I told you in the introduction, also in the background of the century also, that Norman conquest took place in 1066. So here it is the reference to the Norman conquest, that from the time of the King William, from 1066 onwards, he knew all the cases that had been filed. He remembered them all by heart. Thereto he could indite and make a thing. There could no white pinch at his writing. He could write well, he could make a lawsuit. he could prove anything, and there was no one who could find a fault with his writing. So he was such a skillful lawyer. वो अपनी फील्ड में इस कदर उसने एक्सेल किया था कि कोई जो भी बात वो कह देता था उसको कोई भी चैलेंज नहीं कर सकता था, उसको डिसप्रूव नहीं कर सकता था. In every statute could he plain by rote, he ruled by homely in the medley coat, girt with a saint of silk with bars smell, of his array tell I no longer tale. So as far as his statute is concerned, he knew them all by heart. He rode in a very homely manner, and he was wearing a motley coat. As we just discussed earlier, that motley is a colorful dress, a dress which is made up of the colorful patches. Girt with a scent of silk, so it had the lining of very fine silk with bars which had small buttons also on it, metal ornaments on it. Of his array is the dress. The narrator says, the host says that, tell I no longer tale, that about his dressing, that what else he was wearing, I do not tell any longer details. Next we have Franklin. A Franklin was in his company, white was his beard as is the daisy. So there was a Franklin also, a pilgrim in this company, and his beard was as white as a daisy. Of his complexion he was sanguine. Sanguine is red. His complexion was red. He loved, sanguine is basically the color of fire, so he resembled that. He well loved he by the more a sop in wine. So he loved the pieces of bread, the morsels of bread dipped in the wine. So in the morning he took the soup, he took that wine and with the small pieces of bread in it. He loved to take that. A Franklin is a country gentleman. So his beard was as white as a daisy, he was of sanguine color, and he loved to have pieces of bread dipped in the wine every morning. To live in delight was ever his wont. He always wanted to live a happy life in delight, for he was Epicurus' own son. Own son, Epicurus is the Greek philosopher, and he believed in happiness, that happiness, eat and be merry. That healed opinion, that plain delight was very felicity perfect. And what is the Epicurean belief? The Epicurus, the Greek philosopher, he believed that, he was of the opinion that plain delight, that simple happiness was very, it referred to happiness. Felicity is basically happiness. And householder, and that a great was he. He was a householder, he was the head of the house, he controlled a house, he was the master of a house, and he was great. Saint Julian, he was in his country. Saint Julian is the saint of hospitality, somebody who loves to have guests and to serve them. So this Franklin, what was his habit? He was a Saint Julian. उसको बहुत ज़्यादा पसंद था कि उसके पास लोग आए, बैठें, वो उनकी मेहमान नवाजी करें, उनकी खातिर तवाज़ो करें. His breed, his ale was always afternoon. Afternoon is first class. That his bread, his ale is his wine. That whatever he ate, his bread, उसकी जो रोटी पानी जो वाइन वो लेता था, वो सब कुछ हमेशा एकदम फर्स्ट क्लास होता था. And better envied man was nowhere known. And we do not find any better man who because he can be envied also. Without baked meat was never his house. There was always baked meat found on his table, on his dining table. Of fish and flesh they are so plenteous. The fish and flesh, meat and fish was found in plenty in his house. It snowed in his house of meat and drink, of all dainties that men could think. So every type of food, every type of dainty that men could think of, they were all present in his house, and it seemed as if it snowed in his house of meat and drink. So he was a wealthy man, a wealthy young man who could afford to have all these things. On his table he always had roasted meat. After the sundry seasons of the year, sundry means after every season, so changed he his meat and supper. So every year when the season changed, according to the change in the season, he changed his food. He changed his eating habits. Meat here refers to food and supper refers to supper. So he changed these also. So with the change in season, there was a change in his eating habits also. Full many a fat partridge had he in mew. Mew refers to the cage. Partridge is the bird. So he had a lot of partridge. He had lots of birds in his cage. Full many a bream and many a luce in stew. Now, bream and luce and stew, these are the names of the fish. So he had birds in his cage. He had different types of fish present in his home. Woe was his cook, but if his sauce were poignant and sharp and ready all his gear. His cook was also sad if the sauce was not poignant and sharp, it was pungent, and if it was not ready. So this is the condition. I mean, हर चीज़ हर तरह की खाने पीने की अशिया हर वक्त उसके घर में मौजूद हैं. उसके पास बर्ड्स हैं, जब चाहे बर्ड्स को निकाले उसको रोस्ट कर ले. हर तरह की फिश उसके पास पॉन्ड में मौजूद हैं, फ्रेश. एंड इवन द कुक, he is so used to these things that when he does not have all these things, he feels sad. When he does not have these things, he feels sad about it. His table dormant in his hall always stood ready covered all the long day. At sessions there was he lord and sire, full of time he was knight of the shire. So he had the table, it was all covered throughout the day. There used to be meetings, there were sessions, and he used to headed all those meetings, and at those sessions he was the lord also, and for many times he was appointed as the knight of the shire as well. He was a representative member of the parliament as well. So he is a prosperous man who had served in the parliament as well. And last, and a gipser all of silk hang at his girdle, white as morn milk, and a sheriff had he been, and a contour was nowhere swish a worthy vavasor. Vavasor is the king's standard, a person, a farmer who works for the king. So he had a wood knife with him, and he had a silk pouch also with his girdle that hung with his girdle, and it was as white as morning milk. And he was an accountant, and he was a worthy tenant of the king. Next we have 5 people together: a haberdasher, a carpenter, an haberdasher and a carpenter, a web, a dyer and a tapisser, and they were clothed all in a livery of a solemn and a great fraternite. Now these people, they belonged to the working class, they belonged to the guild. Now haberdasher is the modern English equivalent of haberdasher. Web is the weaver. We have dyer, tapester or upholsterer, and they were wearing the they were all serious, and they were in complete unity. They shared that brotherhood of belonging to the same class. That is the reason that all of them, they have been mentioned in the same class, and they individually, they are not that important. That is the reason we do not know their individual names also. Full fresh and new her gear apiked was. Her knives were chapped not with brass, but all with silver, wrought full clance and wheel, her girdles and her pouches every deal. Now it is a little description that how did they look, what did they have. They had with them their knives, and they were not covered with the brass, rather they were covered with the silver, and they had the and it was all trimmed, and it all hung with their girdles and with their pouches. Well seemed eke of a fair burgess to sitten in a Guildhall on a day's average for the wisdom that he can was shaply for to be an alderman. So each of these, they appear to be the prosperous citizens of the society, and they used to sit in the guild hall together, and each of them, they had the wisdom, and they were fit for the to be the aldermen. They were the older people. They were not very young. They were not very gay. For cattle had they no and rente. They did. Cattle refers to the animal, the pets that they had. The cattle they did not have, and the income they had from the rent, and eke our wives would it well assent, and even their wives would agree to it, and else certain were they to blame. It is full fair to be in ye clapped madam, and gone to villages all before, and have a mental royalish ye bore. Now it is with the consent of their wives that they even agree to it, that they have they have given away the animals that they possess in order to, they have rented out those animals to have the income, for the purpose of income, and otherwise their wives also agree to it, otherwise they were to blame for it. And it was fair to call them madam, and they would go to the villages before, and they, in a very royal manner, they would go to their villages in a royal manner. Then they had a cook also with them. A cook they had with them for the nuns, to boil the chickens with the marrow bones, and powder merchant tart and galangal. Well could he know a draught of London ale. London ale is the London wine. So they had a cook also with them for the purpose, for the occasions, and he knew how to boil the chicken with the marrow bones, and how to boil the chicken with marrow bones, and how and to add the different spices in it in order to add taste, like powder merchant, tart, and the root of the sweet cypress as well. And he knew the tastes of all the different types of London wine also. He could roast and seethe and broil and fry, maken mortrix and well bake a pie, and great ham was it, as it thought me, that on his shine and normal had he for blank manger that made he with the best day. Now he could roast. These are his skills, that he could roast, he could cook over fire, he could broil, he could boil, he could fry, and he could even make the stew of the meat, and he could bake even a pie. And on the other hand, the narrator says that it was a great harm. He thought that it was a great harm because he had a cancerous sore on his chin, and he made the black mangar, which is made up of cream and flour. He made the best of it, but from the host or from the narrator's point of view, he says that it was not good for others because he had a cancerous sore also. Let's have a recap of the lecture. We first discussed the character sketches of or the description of the pilgrims, like monk and friar. Friar and monk, once again, they belong to the church, but they are corrupt people of the society. Then we had the Oxford clerk. After the monk and friar, he is an ideal person, somebody who is living his life the way he is supposed to, and very honestly and very sincerely he is living his life. The sergeant of law, he is also he is having some interest in the worldly pursuits and all that. The Franklin, once again, somebody who loved eating and drinking and merrymaking, a very prosperous man of the country. Then we had the some people belonging to the working class: haberdasher, carpenter, dyer, weaver, and the tapester. Finally, the cook, he loved he knew how to make different types of dishes, but the host or the narrator feels pity for him.